world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Monday, October 27th, as you are listening to this. And we got a lot going on. It's the beginning of a new week. And there's always a lot to talk about with this administration and what's going on. Now, I want to start out by talking about something that didn't occur on this podcast, but it occurred over on the Rational Boomer podcast. And if you've been following me for a while, you know I'm routinely a guest over there. And Mike gets emails from time to time from listeners. Well, Mike got an email that concerned me the other day, and he was reading it on the air on the podcast. And this guy had an issue with, myself and how I approach things. He said I was dealing in hopium, that I am coming out, trying to make people feel better and giving them false hope that, everything sucks and we need to be angry and we need to, to fight. But what I'm doing is I'm looking at things rationally, logically, breaking things down and telling you exactly what I think is going to happen. Just because I'm not out here telling you every day that, all hope is lost, everything sucks, and there's no way to move forward. If that's what you're looking for, you've come to the wrong place. I am going to give you a breakdown of what I think is going on. And if that gives you hope, that's actually the goal. I'm not trying to sell anybody on hope, but if there's no hope, then why bother, I guess, is kind of the way I'm looking at it. And there's a lot of things going on where we can point to and we can say, hey, this could happen. This is a change. This is going to be good, etc. And as I'm doing it, all we can do is see what happens going forward. Now, was I kind of telling everybody before the election, did I look at everything and I say, yeah, Kamala Harris is going to win? Because that's what I saw. It wasn't me trying to give anybody false hope or, bring everybody up and say, oh, yeah, it's going to be great. It's all going to be rainbows and unicorns. No. But I looked at it. I saw that was what made sense to me. So that's how I predicted things. Now I'm looking at what's going on with this administration, and I predict what I think is going to happen. I talk about having the midterm elections. Do you want me to say, well, there's not going to be any midterms? Because some people seem to believe that they think the midterms just aren't going to happen, that this administration is going to prevent them. But I don't see how. As we're going to talk about later on, states run elections. So with states running elections, how are these midterms not going to happen? They are. Are they trying to cheat to steal the midterms? A little bit. That's what they're doing with gerrymandering, and they're trying to do voter suppression and things like that. But that is different than just, not having the midterms. Midterms are going to happen. Donald Trump is going to leave office. One way or the other, he will not be president come 12 noon, January 20th, 2029, if he lives that long. We've talked about his health. He has issues with dementia. He has issues with his veins that we know about. He's got this chronic venous insufficiency that is causing problems. He went to Walter Reed for his second annual physical not that long ago. Now we're finding out he actually had an MRI done during that. Well, I've had annual physicals. I have never had an MRI during a physical. He talks about passing the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. Well, you don't give that to somebody without reason. This isn't a standardized test. That is something you give to somebody you suspect of having cognitive problems. And you would probably tell somebody, especially somebody with Donald Trump's temperament, that they did great, especially if they don't realize it. I have had family members who have had to take those kind of tests. And, they didn't realize how bad off, like they had to draw a clock face and it wasn't close. And they were told, you're doing a good job. That's perfect. You tell them those kind of things because you don't want the negative reaction. Donald Trump will be gone come 12 noon, January 20th, 2029 at the latest. But I don't think his health holds up to then. And there's a chance, and I've talked about it, that Republicans will turn on Donald Trump in the midterms, either before the midterms or right after if he costs them the midterms, because they may see their only way forward to have a chance in 2028 is to move away from Donald Trump. That's not selling hope. That's looking at reality. Because one of the things politicians crave more than anything else is power. How do I know this? Well, let's look at a few people, a few examples here. You have Mitch McConnell. Now, granted, he's not seeking re-election here after this term in 26, but he's still in the Senate. He's glitched out a few times where he's frozen in the middle of giving a speech. His eyes go buggy, and he's completely lost and doesn't know where he is. He just fell the other day. Again, this isn't the first time he's fallen. He's 89 years old. But why is he still in Congress? Because he didn't want to give up the levers of power. You have my senator, Chuck Grassley, who I can't stand. If you've listened to me for any length of time, you know I can't stand Chuck Grassley, in part because he won't give up the levers of power. Chuck Grassley is 92 years old. 92. He is up for re-election in 2028 at 95 years old. He wants to run again. If by any miracle, he makes it to the end of that term, he would be 101. Why in the hell is he still running for Congress? Simple. He doesn't want to give up the levers of power. And people in this country, or in this state rather, think having this old man as the longest serving Republican is a good thing for the state because it gives Iowa some relevance. But so instead of letting him retire, they keep telling him, "Oh yeah, Ron, you're doing a great job." There is no reason to have some of these people in power, but they are. And this goes to both sides of the aisle. You've got Nancy Pelosi, who needs to retire. She's facing a primary challenger, I believe, this year. But she doesn't want to give up the levers of power, even though she stepped away from being Speaker of the House. And she won't run for Speaker next time the Democrats are in control. It's just not going to happen. So, but she won't give up her seat and won't, step away from the levers of power. And then you had somebody like Dianne Feinstein, who passed away last year. She was 90 or 91, I believe. And we find out before she died that her daughter had already gone to court, gotten power of attorney, and was controlling her finances because she wasn't in her right mind to control her finances, but she was still voting on legislation. We have people that don't want to give up the levers of power in Congress. Now, that being said, that is going to set up a situation where them continuing to side with Donald Trump is going to end up, causing them to lose control of those levers of power. There are going to be representatives that get voted out. Some of them have already said, I'm just not going to run for re-election because they don't want to lose. They're scared of getting beat. So They may be looking at the 2026 midterms and the 2028 general and saying, well, if we lose the 26 midterms, the only way we've got a shot in 26 is to brand JD Vance in some way that would make him palatable to American voters. How do we do that? Well, here's a thought that they could do is they could remove Donald Trump. Again, possible? Yes. They remove Donald Trump, especially if it happens at some point after the midterms where they lose the House and maybe the Senate. It's entirely possible that they could lose the House by 40 seats. And that's with gerrymandering. I'll talk about that in a second. But they could lose the House by 40 seats. Well, if they are trying to set themselves up to even have a chance for a comeback in 28, maybe they decide to remove Donald Trump, set up JD Vance, and then they could run this narrative to make him sympathetic to the American people of, well, see, JD Vance had to clean up the mess Donald Trump left. He left us such a mess we had to get rid of him. But see, he didn't have a favorable Congress, so he couldn't do anything. So you need to give JD Vance another shot and give us control of Congress again, so we can get stuff done and fix everything that's broken. Because that's the Republican talking point. They love to talk about how they can fix what's broken. However, when it comes down to it, they don't actually fix anything. They break it more, but they have a way they could spin this talking point, keep the levers of power, and make JD Vance kind of a favorable person. I don't think it would work, but I could see them trying it. It's a strategy. And maybe that is something smarter than most Republicans would come up with. I don't know. But as they are trying to do this, they're worried about keeping control of their levers of power. That's not me dealing in hope. That's looking at facts and looking at reality. When I say they could lose the House by 40 or 50 seats despite gerrymandering, here's what I mean. There's a thing called dummy mandering. I don't know if you've heard of that term. And that is where you gerrymander yourself out of relevance. So in Texas, what they've done is they took 5 districts that were all Donald Trump by 65% of the vote, and they took out to where they took 10% of those Republican voters out of each district and shoved them into Democratic districts. Okay? So now you have, instead of 5 districts you're going to win with 65% of the vote, in theory they think they have 10 districts they're going to win with 53 to 54% of the vote. But if voter turnout is high, they may end up still losing those seats. The 5 that they tried to gerrymander out for Democrats, and 5 more. It could work against them. That's called dummy mandering. And it's entirely possible that they end up hurting themselves in the midterms, and they set up something where they have to do something about Donald Trump. That's not me trying to deal in hope. That's me looking at what is and saying, this is what I see. Now, this idea, this guy saying that all I'm dealing is hope. And, I'm not going to run around here saying all hope is lost. Oh, it sucks. We need to get out and we need to fight. Getting out and voting is how we fight. Getting out and doing the No Kings protests is how we fight. What do you want us to do? Do like the J6ers and storm the Capitol? It's not going to accomplish anything. We're fighting the best we can right now. The Democrats in Congress are fighting to keep health care affordable as best they can right now with this government shutdown. Now we'll see if they win that shutdown. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's not, that's what we have to do. We have to go through and fight the ways we can. Coming out here, talking about what is actually going on, what I see is how I do that. That is how I, fight this fight. And if it gives people hope that I'm doing that, well, good. That's not me trying to sell you on hope. It's me trying to be realistic and look at what can actually happen. Because if we're all saying all hope is lost, then they've already won. And I don't want to let them win. So I'm going to keep saying what I think is right. I'm going to talk about how things are and go from there. All right. Now, talking about the midterms, how do I know that the Democrats are in position to take the House and maybe the Senate? Well, because Donald Trump is talking about it and he's terrified. Now, he comes out and he says a couple things here. Well, first of all, he says, well, now we see what happens when you elect a crooked moron to be president of the United States. Now, he was trying to talk about Joe Biden, but in reality, we can look at it that he was talking about himself, because he says crooked moron. Well, Donald Trump is crooked. We know that. He's got 34 felony convictions. Him and his businesses were found civilly liable for fraud numerous times. He had to pay the state of New York $400 and some million for fraud. He was prohibited from doing business in the state of New York. His charity was prohibited from being a charity and had to be taken apart. And look at how many times he has gone bankrupt with his businesses, etc. And you hear about how he never paid his contractors, etc., that he would try to sue them into oblivion so he never had to pay, and then settle those debts on pennies to the dollar if he paid them at all. So, yes, when he says we can see what happens when we have a crooked moron in office, yeah, we see that because we have one right now. And as far as him being a moron, well, let's look at what he has accomplished this term. He has ruined trade pretty much with every country in the world. His tariff plan has cost American consumers a ton of money. He is doing things at a whim, like saying, well, I'm not going to do any business with Canada. We're not going to discuss trade anymore because of that ad they were running with Ronald Reagan. So we're not doing that. He's just on a whim because he won't listen to anybody. He's bombing fishing boats off of Venezuela, claiming that they are smuggling drugs and other illicit substances into the United States with no proof, despite the proper procedure would be let them get into U.S. waters and then seize them and arrest the smugglers and charge them with crimes. Due process doesn't care about that. And he just operates on a whim and is doing whatever he wants. Donald Trump is like I said, he's a moron. He comes out and he's talking to these ranchers are saying buying Argentina beef is not going to fix the economy. It's not going to make beef cheaper. And there's other health concerns, etc., from Argentina. And what does Donald Trump do? And what does he tell this group of ranchers? That he knows more about ranching than they do. Donald Trump, a man who made his money in real estate and the hospitality industry in New York and other major cities, claims to know more about ranching and farming than ranchers and farmers. Somebody who has never stepped foot on a farm to do a day's work on a farm in his life. Somebody who doesn't know the meaning of farm work, who's never had to go do chores or anything like that. Doesn't have a clue. But he thinks he knows more than everybody else. But that's who Donald Trump is. So he says, now we see what happens when we elect a crooked moron. I hope the DOJ goes after everybody who committed fraud in the 2024 elections with as much gusto as they should. But he says he's going to prevent early voting, mail-in voting, day of only in the midterms, and they must show voter ID. Here's the problem with that. He's already issued an executive order basically saying the same thing. I wonder if he even remembers that he did that. The fact that he's talking about it tells me that somebody has at least told him he needs to worry about losing the midterms. Now, why would he be worried about losing the midterms? Oh, maybe because everything's failing around him. Because that, he tried that executive order. That hasn't gone anywhere. Congress has tried to pass the SAVE Act, which would do exactly what he wants. No early voting, no mail-in voting, day of only, must show ID, all of that. That has never passed Congress. They can't get it through. They can't get the votes on it. Okay. So him saying it isn't going to matter. Now, states run elections. All right. They decide who can vote, who can't vote, as long as you meet the minimum requirement federally. And what is the minimum federal requirement to vote? Two things: 18 years old, at least, or an American, well, and an American citizen. Period. That's it. You have those two requirements. You have to be 18 and an American citizen. Now, undocumented illegal immigrants are not voting in federal elections. They're not voting. They might be voting in some local elections because some cities have allowed them the freedom to vote in their city and local elections because those small offices affect them. You know, if you're living in a city, who the mayor is, who the chief of, or who the county sheriff is, those kind of things do affect you. So it makes sense that they would allow people who live there to vote. Now, I'm not going to get into whether or not they should allow undocumented immigrants to vote in those elections, but it makes sense as to why that would be allowed. So undocumented immigrants are not voting in elections. That's just not a thing that's happening. But he wants you to have voter ID. Well, I know here in Iowa, when I go vote, whether early or whatever, in person, I had to give them my ID. That's for the most part already a thing. But one of the reasons why it is not necessarily a requirement, because there are other ways you can prove who you are. I think if you can't provide an ID, I think here in Iowa, I could be wrong, but I think it's like two or three pieces of a certain type of mail, maybe like a city water bill or something like that, where you can prove who you are. But anyway, um, and even if you can't, I think you can get a provisional ballot, and providing that nobody else tries to vote with the same identifying information, your vote would then count. But the reason that they don't use like any sort of a voter ID law is that becomes basically a poll tax. Now, poll taxes are something that used to be used as a way to make sure that poor people and usually minorities could not vote because you had to go to the voting booth, and in order to get a ballot, you had to pay the poll tax, which has now been deemed unconstitutional, which was a fee that you had to pay to vote, and voting is a constitutional right. That is what we do here in this country. You are allowed, if you are a citizen and you are at least 18, you have the right to vote. So you can't necessarily enforce having to have an ID because it becomes a poll tax. Now, there are going to be people that say, well, I have my ID. Why can't the other everybody else just go get their ID? It's just you have to have an ID. Well, for some people, that inconvenience of having to go get a valid ID, they don't always go do that. Maybe they decided they can't afford to go spend the 20, 25, $30, whatever it was at the time to go get an updated ID. Some people don't do that. It is the way it is. Some people can't afford it. And by requiring anything that costs money, then you're making it a tax. Now, if they are willing to give everybody a basic identification card at no cost, then I'm all for allowing them to have voter ID law, that you have to provide an ID. If the ID comes at no cost, if there's a no cost option, whether that is something like you can always go get an ID, just a standard identification card at no cost, but it's only good for a year or something. Make it inconvenient so people have to go back and get it renewed. I don't know what the answer is. But if it was, free to people, then sure, that would be different than charging a poll tax. But Donald Trump doesn't care about that necessarily. He is just trying to say this because he is setting up the narrative for when he loses the midterms. Now, what am I talking about? Well, look at his history. All right, look at his history. Donald Trump goes into the Iowa caucuses in 2016. He loses the Iowa caucuses to Ted Cruz, I believe. I could be wrong if it was Ted Cruz or not, but it doesn't matter. He lost the Iowa caucuses. What does he come out screaming about? It was rigged against me. It was rigged against me. Well, then he goes into a couple more, loses those. I think it was New Hampshire and one other one. Rigged against me, rigged against me. Then he starts picking up steam. Suddenly he quit talking about it being rigged. Quit talking about Iowa and New Hampshire being rigged because he was now starting to gain steam and starting to look like it might make him the nominee. Now, Republicans didn't get out of their own way and make sure he wasn't the nominee, which they should have done. But then he goes into the 2016 general. And what is he screaming and hollering about? Well, the only way I can lose to Hillary Clinton is if they rig it against me. He was saying that with weeks to go before the election. Then he comes out as the winner. And he was still saying it was rigged against him when talking about the popular vote because she won the popular vote. So you have that. Then you get into the 2020 election. And again, he goes into the election. What is he talking about when he's going up against Sleepy Joe? Oh, well, the only way I could lose to Sleepy Joe Biden is if it is rigged against me, as if it's rigged against me. Then he loses, and he loses big. And then he spends 2 months trying to do exactly what he claimed Biden was doing, which was rig the election. He calls up Georgia demanding that they find the votes to help him win. He calls up different states, and they do the fake elector scheme where they try to go in and certify the vote against what the actual results were by submitting their own slate of electors that would have voted for Donald Trump. Then they do January 6th, where they try to stop the certification of an election he lost. Now, he wants you to believe that that was set up by Joe Biden and the left in order to stop the certification of an election in which Joe Biden won and they were certifying Joe Biden the winner, but they wanted to stop the certification to make Donald Trump look bad? When if they wouldn't have, if it was something set up by the left, which it wasn't, but if it was, what would it have accomplished? Joe Biden was still going to be the president on January 20th. It wouldn't have changed anything. No, the whole plan was to sow some doubt into the election and then kick the vote to the House of Representatives and the Senate so they could decide and go by one state, one vote, because that's how that works. And they would have come to the conclusion that Donald Trump actually won and he would have gotten a second term. That was his plan. But he was so worried about losing that he was screaming it was rigged. And then he was even talking about 2024 being rigged. And now, because he lost the popular vote still in he won the popular vote in 24, but he's not happy with how much he won by in 24, and it looks like he's going to lose the midterms. He's already screaming again that it's rigged and talking about how can't do mail-in ballots, can't do early voting, except we've done mail-in ballots and early voting for years before Donald Trump was even considered for the nominee of being for any office. I mean, that's how they've done military ballots for decades, was mail-in when they were stationed overseas. How else are you going to do it? Just tell them, no, you don't get a vote? Well, that doesn't work. But see, that tells me Donald Trump is terrified of losing the midterms. He's terrified because he knows what'll happen if the Democrats get control of the House of Representatives. He will get nothing through Congress. He will barely get funding through Congress. And in fact, he will probably have to compromise with Democrats, and they would end up getting funding through that would probably be reversing some of the cuts from his one big beautiful bill. And he would probably have to cave because what's he going to do? He won't have the majority in Congress anymore unless somehow they pass appropriations bills before Republicans are out of power that would fund it for the rest of his term. It's just not going to happen. He's worried about that. He is worried about getting impeached again. Well, gee, why would he be worried about getting impeached? What could he have possibly done that would be impeachable? Well, let's see. And this is by no means an inclusive list. You have him bombing fishing boats off the coast of Venezuela, where he is just blowing up these fishing boats, claiming that they're smuggling drugs and illicit substances. But the reality is what he should be doing is letting them get into U.S. water if they are smuggling contraband, have them get intercepted by the Coast Guard, searched, seize the contraband, and charge the smugglers. That's proper procedure, not blow up the boat on no proof and then just claim they were doing that. Let's see. You have him turning the National Guard loose on American cities, trying to intimidate and terrorize Americans, in doing it as a show of force, claiming it's for crime prevention and to clean up crime. But in reality, he's just trying to show that he's a tough guy. Well, after that, you have everything he's doing with ICE, and ICE not following any sort of proper procedure and giving anybody due process, etc. And him going into cities saying, we're going to arrest all the undocumented illegal immigrants, etc. That's only part of it. Let's see. You also have him trying to do everything with executive order and all of those that are unconstitutional. Him railing against judges that find his orders unconstitutional. You have him deporting, or his administration is deporting, undocumented immigrants to third countries where they're not even from. You're from Venezuela, but sorry, we're sending you to somewhere in Africa just because they agreed to take our deportees. We're going to reopen Guantanamo Bay to hold undocumented immigrants. You have the building of Alligator Alcatraz and all of that. And then probably the biggest thing that he has to worry about potentially getting impeached for is the demolition of the White House. Now, he has torn apart the East Wing of the White House. It's gone. If it's not completely gone, it's mostly gone based on the images I've seen. Now, I know you're going to see MAGA people in the comments talking about how other presidents have done renovations, etc., and how Obama did the same thing. Well, Obama didn't do the same thing. Obama had him drill a couple of holes in the tennis courts, put in a couple of basketball hoops, and paint some lines to make a tennis court a dual purpose as also a basketball court. Guess what? That probably ran several $1,000s top end. Very minor, and it didn't affect the structure or the integrity of the actual White House building. They could say, well, Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the roof. Okay. Didn't affect the structural integrity. And Ronald Reagan took them right back out as soon as he became president. They go back to Truman, and Truman gutted a big chunk, if not most, of the White House. I'm not sure exactly how much got gutted during Truman's term. I wasn't alive back then. But the difference there is he did it with congressional approval, oversight, planning, and funding. It was all laid out, and it was a slow, meticulous process. And they did it because they said a big chunk of the White House needed major structural upgrades to be safe. So they did. What Donald Trump did was on a whim, because he got embarrassed because of the No Kings, and because 7 to 10 million people took to the streets told him and the rest of the world exactly what they thought about him. He tore down the East Wing. And if that wasn't bad enough, This all seems to happen during the government shutdown, all to build a gaudy it was originally $230 million. Now I'm hearing 300 million, if not even more, for this ballroom, where the estimates don't seem to match with what we're actually getting built. The plans don't seem to match with what's being built for the limited plans we're seeing, the artist's rendering. Uh, the interior spaces don't appear to be matching up with the exterior shots, and they're wanting to build a 90,000 square foot ballroom that's only going to house 1,000 people. And all of that during a government shutdown with no funding, and when the agency that would be in charge of overseeing any of that happening is closed. So could Donald Trump get impeached by Democrats? Definitely. Are there going to probably be impeachment investigations if the Democrats get the House back? Definitely. And again, going back to my topic from the beginning of this video, that's not selling hope. That's a fact. That, they're going to happen. He could get impeached again very easily because he has done impeachable things. Now, what might be changing is whether or not Republicans would be willing to go along with that impeachment. And if they think it gets them a better chance at winning in 28, and for them to have a chance at retaking the House and Senate in 28, they may move away from Donald Trump. Period. But that is something we'll have to watch as that develops, whether or not they decide to make that choice. But Donald Trump's terrified of the midterms, and that's because he's talking about it. When he says we're not going to allow mail-in voting and early voting, etc., that means he's terrified of losing because he's afraid of losing in the midterms. Now, speaking of Donald Trump and this ballroom, Representative Eric Swalwell was on one of the Sunday morning shows. I don't remember which one. But he kind of said that he thinks the ballroom should be a litmus test for the 2028 presidential nominee. And that the next Democratic president should tear down the ballroom. And they should commit to tearing down the ballroom in order to rebuild the East Wing. And that's not a bad plan. I've just been questioning whether or not that's the priority. If that should be one of the things that we hold out as the main litmus test for what we want in a Democratic nominee. And while I don't want to see the ballroom built, and I wouldn't be sad if it gets destroyed and the East Wing gets rebuilt. You're talking about wasting American taxpayer money to tear it down, wasting American tax money. Well, that should never have needed to be spent in the first place because Donald Trump shouldn't have torn down the East Wing to rebuild the East Wing, when there's going to be a lot more things that we need to fix. Okay? I'm not saying agreeing to tear it down is a bad idea, because I don't want to see that ballroom on the White House grounds. I'm not even sure if it gets built in 4 years, if it'll be done by the time the next Democratic president takes over with what they're talking about. And actually, this ballroom and him destroying the East Wing is not going to play well for Republicans in the midterms. I just think that we might have other issues to be concerned about, fixing the economy and shoring up our democracy from the effects of the Donald Trump presidency, whether that means trying to pass constitutional amendments to prevent things like Donald Trump becoming president ever again, things like that. We need to do things to shore things up, to make sure that we don't go through a period like this ever again. So while Eric Swalwell does have a good idea, we do, the idea of tearing down the ballroom is probably a good one. I just don't know if that should be something that we hang our hat on as far as who the nominee is. Because if the rest of the priorities don't line up, whatever happens to the ballroom, it should be secondary to fixing the economy, shoring up things with our allies and securing our democracy. Now, speaking about the 2028 and the front runner or whoever the nominee is going to be, a couple names came out over the weekend about 2028 and the Democrats. Now, the odds-on favorite right now appears to be Gavin Newsom. And he was asked in an interview if he wanted to run for 2028. And of course he said, well, yeah, it's on my mind. Of course I'd run. Something like that. And it's a little early for Gavin Newsom to be declaring. And in fact, the simple fact is, with one exception that I can think of, no one who isn't an incumbent has never been the front runner this early and actually gotten the nomination and been elected. Now, the exception to that was Donald Trump, because Donald Trump was already talking pretty much about this time in 2021 about running in 2024. And we kind of figured once he had said he wanted to run in 24 that he was going to get the nomination. Now, I really thought there might have been a chance that the Republicans had grown some sense and grown a spine and would have told him no, but they didn't. So it's a little early for Gavin Newsom to be declaring himself the front runner. However, by doing that, what he might be doing is using the midterms as a testing ground, because he's going to take a lot of heat. He's going to have a big target on his back through the midterms by Republicans, especially with their ad campaigns, etc. They're going to be saying things like, oh, this politician, well, he's aligned with Gavin Newsom and Newsom's policies. And, if you vote for this politician, they're going to help make sure Gavin Newsom's your next president, things like that. And when they do that, he's going to be able to see how voters react to him being dragged through the mud by Republicans and how that may affect whether or not he's viewed favorably from, 1 week, from now till then, etc. As things are going, he is going to have to make decisions, etc. It's just way too early for him to be deemed the actual front runner at this point in time. Now, he could end up becoming the nominee, yes, but I just think it's too early. He's probably peaked. And by the time 2028 comes around, it probably will be somebody else. Now, another person who was brought up again, who hasn't ruled out running, was Kamala Harris. She has not said definitively she wouldn't run. She has said before she's not done yet. And she's going to be doing things to help people get elected in 2024. And again, I think she's going to use it as a test to see how voters react to her, how the media handles it, how Republicans handle it, etc. And she may be able to rebrand and retool and run for 28. Point is, it doesn't matter at this point. It really doesn't matter who the Democrats run in 28. Not for what's going on right now. We can worry about 28 after the 26 midterms. First things first, we have to give Democrats control of at least one, if not both, chambers of Congress. If Democrats get control of the House, like we were talking about, there's going to be congressional investigations. They're going to expose a lot of the Republicans for what has happened right now, what has happened in this country under Donald Trump, and how all of that is shaking out. And then they're also going to probably have impeachment investigations for Donald Trump for all of the things he's done, which is important. Beyond that, they're also going to be able to prevent anything from happening. There would be no legislation passed. If they get control of the Senate as well as the House, not only would no legislation get passed, but um, no nominees would get through. He wouldn't be able to appoint any sort of Supreme Court justice if a seat pops up, or just district judges or appellate judges or whatever, because Donald Trump wants to appoint these judges, and if the Senate is there, they'll block all of his nominees, except for maybe the very moderate people that a Democrat may have nominated, that kind of thing. Donald Trump will not be able to do anything if the Democrats have control of Congress, and he knows it. So that's got to be our main focus. Now, Donald Trump is currently on an Asia trip while the government is shut down. And because he's over in Asia, he was in Malaysia, I believe, and he was talking to President Xi of China, and he is claiming there's a deal. Again, this is like the fourth, fifth time, something like that, where he has claimed that he has got a trade deal with China. So what's in this trade deal? Well, once again, more about getting standardized tariffs and things like that. Scaling the tariffs back from his amped up 157% that was supposed to go into effect November 1st. Well, he even admitted the other day that 157% tariffs are unsustainable. So this is going to be his way of being able to back it off by saying, well, we had a deal in place, or the framework of a deal anyway. So I'm going to back it off and give us time to negotiate. It's his way of being able to chicken out without actually chickening out and trying to spin it as a win for himself. Then, of course, he's claiming wins about that they are going to help invest money in and do more to prevent the flow of fentanyl into the United States, including the flow of the ingredients to make fentanyl. Except he's using fentanyl as his excuse for every country he's dealing with trades with. He said that about Mexico. He said it about Canada. He said it about a bunch of other countries. Makes you wonder if it's just not his new word of the day. But supposedly they're going to be investing, and trying to help prevent the flow of fentanyl into the United States. And if that is in there, that is a good thing. I will give him credit for that. And then apparently there's stuff in there about rare earth minerals. Now, we need rare earth minerals in order to make computer chips. And it's used in a lot of things for technology. Well, up until Donald Trump came into office this term, we had never really heard about a lot about rare earth minerals because it wasn't a thing. We were able to source them as we needed them. China wasn't doing anything to affect their distribution. However, when Donald Trump started fucking around with the tariffs, they said, wait a minute, we're not going to deal with that. So their countermeasure was to start restricting rare earth minerals. And they have like 90% of the world's refining capabilities to refine the rare earth minerals into the things we need. So they have a lot of control over that. So they exercised that and said, yeah, we're going to put a stop to that. Okay. So we had the rare earth minerals. And then he's also claiming that there's going to be a guaranteed purchase of American soybeans. Great. That probably doesn't kick in. I don't think that's going to be affected for this growing season. That damage is already done. If it is true, they're going to start buying again next year. But now the number I saw in the article I read said something like $12.5 billion. Sounds like a lot of money, right? Except I'm pretty sure they were going to buy 20 billion this year. So they bought nothing this year. And in fact, they went to Argentina and bought soybeans from Argentina instead. And because they did that, the farmers suffered. And now he's got a supposed trade deal where he is telling Canada, where he's saying China is going to end up buying I think $12 billion in soybeans. So they're going to be buying even fewer soybeans than they would have this year. Sure, it's going to be an increase next year because 12 billion is still greater than zero, but it's less than what we were selling them. So Donald Trump fucks up again. And that's if this deal even takes place. And then, of course, the other thing was, again, they're claiming that they've got a deal for TikTok. Well, here's the problem with that. China and ByteDance aren't committing to any sort of deal with TikTok. They're not announcing any sort of a deal for TikTok. I think this is just Donald Trump coming up with a way to back off of TikTok yet again by saying, well, we had frameworks of a deal. And he's going to keep using that as an excuse to not enforce the TikTok ban because he knows the TikTok ban is really unpopular. And he thinks by continuing to save it, he looks like the hero. That's what he cares about, is looking like a hero. And he cares about his own ego and his image. So he says that they have a deal on TikTok. Now, the last deal we heard, I don't know if this is going to be the same deal, was going to have or the company Oracle here in the United States control all of the user data. But wait a minute, I think they already do that. All U.S. data for TikTok currently is stored on servers inside the U.S. It is not sent back to China. There was going to be a board of directors that had like 6 or 7 companies in there that were going to have a say in what happens here. And that ByteDance was going to have to give up control of the algorithm, and they were going to retrain the algorithm for TikTok. Well, gee, they retrained the algorithm. Are they going to make it more like Truth Social or like how Twitter became after Elon Musk bought it and have it not be favorable to people on the left? But again, we're not hearing any confirmation of any of that from China. So there's no guarantee that this trade negotiation is even happening. But they claim that there's a framework yet again, and I think he's going to use it to try to salvage TikTok and come out looking like a winner. But he's using this Asia trip to talk trade deals and do all of that, all while our government is shut down and while nothing is going on here at the home front. Why isn't the master negotiator, instead of out being in Asia trying to negotiate over there, why isn't he here trying to negotiate with Democrats? Oh, right, he doesn't want to negotiate with Democrats. We are in day 27 of the government shutdown. And today, later today, about 3 p.m. Eastern, the Senate is coming back. Now, we will see if Josh Hawley's bill gets a vote. He introduced it last week, and that was one that would make sure food stamps get paid out for the month of November. Now, this administration is already saying food stamp money's not going out in November, and of course they're trying to blame Democrats in violation of the Hatch Act, which says government agencies can't do political things, but Donald Trump doesn't care about that. And of course we find out the Hatch Act is one of those things that ends up being not enforced, not nearly as well. So we'll see if Josh Hawley's bill gets passed. Of course, if it does, then you would think, because they want to keep the food stamp money going, despite the fact that Republicans have been against food stamps for years, they know how bad it would be and how bad it would look for them if they let the food stamps not go out, the SNAP benefits not go out for November. They don't want to get blamed for that. So they are going to probably try to pass it. But that means Mike Johnson would have to bring the House back into session to vote on it. And if they bring the House into session, that means he's got to swear in Representative Grijalva. He's been trying to find every excuse not to swear her in. But why? Why doesn't he want her to take her seat? Well, because, and one of the things Donald Trump has been successful with this government shutdown, is because we've been talking the shutdown and everything else, and now the destruction of the East Wing, we haven't really talked about the Epstein files. Well, there's a discharge petition in the House of Representatives, which will force a vote of the House on whether or not to force the DOJ to release the Epstein files. Now, it'll take 218 signatures to force a vote on the Epstein files, and it would take at least 218 votes to pass this resolution. Now, they have 217 signatures right now. Representative Grijalva would be the 218th signature. And assuming that everybody who signed the discharge petition to force the vote, votes in favor of releasing the Epstein files, it would go on to the Senate. Now, its fate in the Senate is unclear, but it doesn't matter. This isn't about actually releasing the Epstein files. This is about forcing that vote. Why? Well, Republicans don't want to be put on record of having to defend the Epstein files. They don't want to have to sit there and say, yes, release them, or no, don't release them. Because if they say yes, release them, Donald Trump is going to view them as hostile to this administration, and he's going to do everything in his power to primary them, to challenge them, call them out, and sick his MAGA base on them when it comes to the elections, etc. And they may not get reelected that way. But on the other side, if they do say they say, no, we don't want to release the Epstein files. Well, because some of the loudest voices for the releasing the Epstein files are coming from the right, they're afraid of also going up against those same voters and not getting reelected. And why is the right so hard pressed to release the Epstein files? Because they have been told for so long that it's only going to be Democrats in those files. Democrats do all these horrible things to children, etc. That Democrats do this and Democrats do that, and liberals and liberals and liberals. Oh, think of the children. Oh, good conservative people would never do anything bad to children. All of that stuff. They've been told for so long. They want that proof. And now they think that with releasing the files, that would give them that proof. Because they don't fathom any sort of idea that Republicans could be on that list. Mike Johnson doesn't want that vote to come out, in part because he's afraid that since he didn't prevent it from being voted on, that they may vote him out as Speaker, because Donald Trump will want him out. And how that could play out is if I think it only takes like 5 or 7, something like that, members of the House on the Republican side say they want to call for a vote of no confidence. If those 5 or 7 vote with all Democrats, Mike Johnson's out as Speaker, and they would have to find a new Speaker of the House. So that's one of the reasons why he doesn't want to do that. He's trying to find every excuse to keep them out. And if the Senate were to, say, pass this bill to fund food stamps for November, even though it's something that needs to happen, he's going to have to bring the House back, and he's terrified about that idea. He doesn't want to do it. So as this government shutdown enters day 27, as you're listening to this, it doesn't seem like there's an end in sight. Maybe there'll be some hope to get food stamps passed. I doubt it. I don't know if that'll pass the Senate. I don't even know if it's going to get voted on. I don't know what the schedule is for that yet. But maybe this week will surprise us, and they will actually start negotiating in earnest, because they're terrified of, starting out the month without food stamp money going out, without SNAP benefits going out. So that's what I've got for you today. I want to remind you that, like I said in the open, that there always is some hope. If you're looking at things and all you can see is the negative, I'm trying to give you the ideas of why I think all hope is not lost. And we got to continue to fight, yes, and we will win. And one of the ways we win is by winning in the midterms and making sure that Donald Trump doesn't have full control of Congress for the second half of his term. I'll be back tomorrow with even more, because there's always stuff to talk about, especially with this administration.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.